Well, good morning, and at least morning when I'm taping this. We're continuing with our discussion on Christian engagement of secular humanism. We last time talked about four keys to engaging secular humanism: living in Christ, love for people, serving people, and then lastly, sharing Christ. And we talked about underserving. We talked about servant model, and discussed several aspects of that help us to develop relationships with people in a way that we're better able to share the gospel. So today we're just going to finish with section 4. This is part 4 of 4 for this series of lectures, and that'll conclude this series. Plus, for those of you taking the World Religions course, this also will be the last recorded lecture for that course. So we're going to get started on that. Let me share the screen with you here, and there we go. Well, to kind of summarize some of the thoughts we've put forward at various times, we'll just look at the biblical Christian perspective of non-Christians. Unfortunately, in the world today, there's this tendency for people to, on one side or the other, to look at each other as enemy. The enemy of Christians is not non-Christians. The enemy of Christians is Satan and the work he does. Now, he may use Christians or non-Christians or other means to work against God's will, but that does not mean that non-Christians are our enemy. And in fact, we are told to look at them as people created in the image of God. It says that Christ died for all, and so they're of equal value as Christians are, and so the greatest commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. But second greatest, love your neighbor as yourself. Life and relationships are of utmost importance, and we should keep in mind that Jesus emphasized that if you took those two greatest commandments, all the laws and the prophets said can be summed up in that, because you take all 613 laws, they either have to do with your relationship with God or your relationship with others. And therefore, we need to keep in mind that part of what our work as Christians in the world engaging, in this case, we're talking about the secular humanist perspective of the world, is that they too are people created in the image of God, but we're also to love them. And Christ even says we're to love our enemies. It goes even further. And so remember, God's ultimate concern is for them is shown on what he did on the cross, for dying for all people, so that all people could have the opportunity to come into a right relationship with him. And we also need to remember that despite how great of a teacher Jesus was and who he was, that there were those who didn't follow him, didn't believe in him, and even persecuted him, and eventually would put him to death. And so we should know that from our perspective that there's always going to be people in the world that will not believe and may even work against what we do as Christians and what we believe as Christians. But that doesn't change how our attitude should be towards them, even though it makes it more difficult. But when Jesus points out we also have to love our enemies, we're called to a high standard. As Paul has put it in several places, and it also appears in Hebrews, live at peace with all people so much as it depends on you. And so this should be a part of our DNA as Christians. Live by the golden rule: do unto others as you would want them to do to you. Good rule of thumb: and we should follow that. As Jesus put it in the Sermon on the Mount, salt and light. We should be salt and light in the world and provide things in this world that makes the world better. You know, people like their food better if they have salt, and salt's a preservative, and people want light. They don't want to have to wander around in darkness, and physically or spiritually for that matter. And then be a positive influence on people's lives. And all the things that we've been mentioning in this series uh, has this aspect to it. Well, how should we live as Christians in the midst of our secular and pluralistic world? And the early Christians, as we've seen, had this challenge. They met the challenge, and by the AD 350, about 60% of the Roman Empire had become Christians, and even in the midst of persecution. And so it's not so we can get some important aspects of this, and they always look to Christ as the center of everything, and so should we. We need to move from being self-centered to Christ-centered. In other words, putting emphasis on who Christ is, what he's about, what he means to people, and what that means to how we treat people and how we act towards people. Jesus got in a lot of trouble from the Jewish leaders. They were always criticizing him for hanging out with the sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, and so forth. And he said one time, I said, well, doctors got to go where the sick people are. And we need to keep in mind that Jesus was it's not self-centered, but he was centering on his mission, and so should we. Uh, and we should move from self-centered to other-centered, and realize that we are called to serve other people, and we were called to a mission. Jesus instituted that mission with what when he came to earth and showed God as God who came in the flesh and died for people. And in completing his mission, if you read in John 17, the high priestly prayer there, he's praying about completing his mission, but he's pointing out there's a mission's going to continue. Then you have the Great Commission statements where he sends his followers into all the world. Other-centered is what we're about. Value others as much as Christ does, and of course that's quite a challenge. We're not perfect as Jesus was, but he has set the standard, and he has given us an example, and we can do better at it than we are. And unfortunately, we reach out to people and we want to share the gospel. We have to be able to show that we value them as people created in God's image. And I'm afraid sometimes we're not very good at doing that. We react to some of the things they do in a negative way. And it's not that we have to agree with them, but at the same time, we've got to learn how to show value to them, even in the midst of disagreeing with what they believe or how they live or what they do. So to do that, though, we have to live authentically in our relationship with Christ, as we talked about in the 4 keys to live in Christ. And that's a challenge for us to be authentic in our faith. And that faith, though, should manifest itself as not self-centered, but Christ-centered, other-centered, and that we look and value other people in the way that Christ did. Practice Christ's attitude towards others, and even the lady that was brought to him said that she was caught in active adultery. Of course, you have to say where in the world was the guy, but Jesus showed her mercy and pointed out, one stoner, one of you don't have any sin, go ahead and throw the first stone. Well, he was pointing out we all deal with sin, and but Jesus showed mercy, and that's what we should do. And he does, you know, no one condemns you, but go and sin no more. Is We don't condone sin, but at the same time we have mercy for those who struggle and have to, as we all do to some degree, with living a life pleasing to God. Develop the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Um, these are just a nice, concise list that Paul gives us from Galatians, that we should emphasize those aspects in our life and work on making those important attitudes in our life. And then share beliefs in the midst of practicing the fruit of the Spirit. If we can manifest those fruit of the Spirit, what we do when we share our faith is more meaningful to ourselves for sure, but to the people who we share with. They realize that we're being authentic, even though they might not agree, and they might say, "Well, I just don't want to do that," or "That's not something I'm interested in," and that will be the case. And Jesus had people that did that, and we'll have people that do that, but we still have to live authentically and practice this through the Spirit in our lives. So we've already looked at the fruit of the Spirit that we mentioned earlier, and noticed that it was contrasted here with deeds of the flesh. So immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions. And then you got fruit of the Spirit. Now, if you just looked at the two lists, which one would you want to be a part of? Which one, who would you want to be around? The one practicing the deeds of the flesh, or the one practicing the fruit of the Spirit? So it's just a reminder here that these are important. Oops. Okay. And through love, serve one another and fulfill. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And so, as we serve people, we can fulfill this aspect of that we're loving our neighbors as ourselves. And that's an important aspect. Of course, we do have to have self-love, and that is important. We have to see our own value, and that's the value that's intrinsic in the fact that we're created in God's image. The great thing about Christianity is that the value of humanity is built into us. It's intrinsic to who we are as people created in the image of God. You can't say that about humanity if you come from a secular humanist perspective, because it's all accidental, and there is no intrinsic value to humanity, just any different than other animals that happen to accidentally come together. And so you got chipmunks accidentally came together as chipmunks, but humans came together as humans. Intrinsically, there's no difference in their value from a secular humanist perspective. But for Christians, we do see the intrinsic value that humans are created image of God, and thus special in God's sight and loved equally by God wherever and whoever they are. So living by the Spirit, that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control is to be emphasized. So this helps us in developing our spiritual life. And there's a lot of books out there that talk about, how to develop your spiritual life and things to help you focus on spiritual development and to be more cognizant of what you need to do spiritually. I'm just listing a few things. Spend more time in spiritual pursuits. We live in a busy world, and boy, can we get caught up in things. And certain times of your life are busier than others. I remember when my wife and I have kids at home, it was, quite hectic at times, and kids would play sports. We did limit our kids to say, in the year you can play two sports. Beyond that, too much. But we need to emphasize time for prayer, time for worship, for fellowship, Bible study, singing, service projects, things that engage us directly in, pursuing God's mission in the midst of our everyday activities, and that sometimes can be a challenge. Contemplate God. We need to spend time thinking about God, who He is, what He wants, what He's worth doing in our lives, and maybe try to think, well, am I really responding to God as well as I could be as someone who is a follower of Him? Um, Seek truth. We should always be looking for the truth and realizing we live in a world where truth is quite relative most of the time. And secular humanism promotes this relativity, and but yet God speaks of His truth, and Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." We need to realize there is ultimate truth. Now, do we fully understand it all the time? No, but it's understandable enough that we can live by it, and we know that if Jesus is the truth, we follow His example, His teachings. We are seeking the truth, but by seeking truth, we can listen to other people's views and realize that they may be different, but we still know that God has revealed this truth and that we can be faithful to it, even in the midst of hearing different ideas of what truth is. Meditate on God's word. This A lot of times we just get in the habit of maybe going to church and we listen to a sermon, but we don't really spend time engaging in the reading of God's word. And a lot of busy schedules, things like that. But this is an important aspect because in that is revealed the truth. And when we talk about a Christian worldview or a biblical worldview, having a biblical worldview means we need to understand the teachings that are revealed in the Bible. And meditating on that word is an important aspect. And then recognize the limitations and brevity of this life. Uh, we we have this lifetime, and for some people it's a lot shorter than for other people. As I was recording this course, and just yesterday, one of the students who was in this course, we found out he had died the day before, and brevity of life. He was a young man, but we do have to recognize the limitations and brevity of this life. We'll never be perfect. It's a limitation. We'll never know everything, but there is enough to live life fully. And I think Jesus has made that life, full life, available in a way that's we don't even fully understand. And if like I was basically going the secular route before I changed directions. You know, I was looking at life in a different uh, from a different perspective, and so we just have to realize uh, that life has its limitations on how we understand things, and that's part of sharing, so that people will see there is something maybe they haven't considered. And recognize dependence on someone. Ultimately, we're all dependent on God, whether we believe in God or not. But we also, if you just look at your life in general, you're growing up, when you're young, you're dependent on your parents, and they can do quite well, or sometimes they let you down, and they may have something that they do that just messes up the family at times. but we're all dependent, and even when we get out and professions, we'll find that we're dependent on our jobs, we're dependent on our bosses to some degree, and we may be able to have our own business and not have that kind of dependency, but ultimately, there is someone we're dependent on. We need to recognize the relational aspects of life, both the relationship between ourselves as human beings and the divine. And this is important because this tells us our value, the value of humanity as being created in the image of God, and the source, that's the divine. And our relationship with that divine, we need to recognize that. And then the relationship that he wants us to have with other humans. So love your neighbor as yourself, the second greatest commandment. So those two commandments keep coming back in our discussion because they're so foundational, right? They're with that, as we saw in that pyramid early on. You got humanity created in the image of God, and the two greatest commandments. Then we mentioned the weightier matters of the law, mercy, justice, faithfulness, and then the golden rule to, treat people as you'd want to be treated. All of those things are part of this relational aspect, and ultimately, living in this world really is about relationships, and we see that pretty much in the human interaction easily, but oftentimes we want to segregate the divine out. And of course, secular humanist perspective, there is no divine. So by presupposition and by just taking the position that only the physical world exists, they don't even have to consider the other. But what we're calling for people to consider is that the world is both a physical world and a spiritual world, and that God's involved in all of that and made it that way. And in doing this, we contemplate life's greatest purpose, which is to live relationally with God and others, for me. And, and that's Jesus called people to him to be in a right relationship with God, but also to live proper relationships with the world around them and make the world a better place. And ultimately, it's when Jesus returns, we'll have a perfect world once again. All right. Pursue care and service to others is one of those aspects that encompasses the greatest purpose. And, so our greatest purposes revolve around our relationship with God, our relationship with others. How do we see the unseen? And one of the challenges with secular humanism, since it by definition will say that there is no unseen world, there is no spiritual realm, where we only have the physical realm. And of course, that statement in and of itself can't be proven by scientific method or anything in the physical world. It's a presupposition, it's an ideology. But how we can see the unseen world sometimes to help people understand that there's a lot of things they can't see. So we contemplate what we experience that is unseen. I asked my classes on, I said, can you see love? I mean, can you actually see love? And no, but do you believe in it? And all my students said, oh yeah, I believe love exists, but you can't see love itself. You can see what you think is the results of someone's attitude of love by the way they act towards people, but you can't see love. Can't see air. There's a lot of things we can't see that we believe is there, and thought. We can't observe thought, but it's everybody believes it's there. So we have to understand that just because something is unseen or not of a physical nature that can be, seen by the five senses, that it doesn't exist. Faith. Everybody lives by some kind of faith. I mean, if you didn't have faith that you, when you got up this morning and you were going to drive to work, that you were, going to arrive safely and not be in a car accident and be killed. Uh, you know, most time we get up, don't think much about it. But the truth matters, you don't know. If you thought you were going to be in a car accident and be killed, you probably would not go to work that day. But by faith, you figure, hey, I'm going to make it to work. That's a broad type of faith. Uh, but we do have that aspect in our lives. We live by certain thinking that we don't know for sure and haven't proved by a scientific method that this will happen. And so faith is part of the unseen. Cultural history of believing in the unseen world. This one is something we have to take seriously, is that humans are notoriously religious. And there's been no culture in the world that hasn't been religious. And the idea of secular humanism, where they just take out the whole spiritual dimension, is just a blip in this history of humanity. Uh, and even today, 95% of the world is religious. It's only in certain parts of the world, the in Western Europe and U.S. some now, and a few other places, that idea of just physical world only has a larger following. The vast majority of the world's not that way. People are just built. I think part of being created in the image of God just built that aspect into us. But the secular humanist perspective has to explain that away, and we did cover that in earlier lectures about psychological, subjective understanding of religion, or evolutionary theory of religion, those. But of course, we looked at the fact that the source of religion is God. But cultural history tells us special revelation. Just look at the world that it is designed, and the designing of it is so intricate, and the odds of it ever, happening by accident, it's just mathematically phenomenal. I can't even get my head around the idea of just what the odds are. And even if you contemplate 100 billion years, uh, as how long it took this universe to evolve, that flies in the face of math that says just for certain aspects of it, the odds are in the trillions, not the billions. But that's for another course. Special revelation, how do we see? Understanding the world by looking at what God's revealed in Scripture. And this Bible is a very powerful book. And there are parts, hard to understand, or even, wonder why we want to read them. But on the other hand, the vast majority of it is something that is very meaningful to us and can be to everyone who gets involved in reading it. And we want to not neglect that, but it helps us to understand this unseen aspect of the world we live in. And then natural revelation, looking at the world around us, is, this majesty of the world, and just its beauty and its organization and so forth. And then reason. One of the things I try to emphasize is that oftentimes people who are anti-religious or or secular humanists in thinking, they want to pare down religion to just feelings or some subjective events that occur. And but really, reason is an integral part of Christianity and biblical worldview. You cannot put your trust or faith in something without reasoning to it, and at least from a Christian perspective, reason is a part of who we are as human beings. God made us reasoning humans, and He reveals His special revelation. You need reason to do that, to read that, and to understand it. And so, this whole idea that faith should be boiled down to some kind of just experience or subjective feeling isn't what's being taught in Christian theology. And in fact, we are reasoning beings, and reason is very powerful in understanding, coming to faith, and understanding the world we live in as something created by God. And then prayer. It's a lot of times people just pull out prayer when something bad happens, like we had the events of 9/11. There was a lot more praying going on, but at the same time, we have to realize that uh, prayer points us towards this unseen and helps us maybe to think about it more, and so that can help us with seeing the unseen. Well, so the Christian perspective or the biblical worldview, we would say humanity is both spiritual and physical, as we've been saying. If you read Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3, you see there Paul talking about the body, the soul, and the spirit as the physical body, the soul meaning breath. That's what animates the body, the breath. And the spirit is spiritual dimension of a person. And so in biblical worldview sees God Himself intertwined. He's involved in everything in it, and but he's rules over this world, this kingdom, which means God's rule. And in this sense, what the biblical worldview is calling people to see is that there is both this physical and spiritual dimension, and you just don't have, the spiritual dimension. Okay, we'll take that one on Sunday, but otherwise leave it alone. Or you want to keep it as your personal thought, but not part of everyday living. That's a thing. So the secular humanism tries to, if you have to have that, they say, well, you need it for some kind of psychological crutch, just keep it to yourself. But what we're saying is no, that God intended this all to be integrated, and He's ruling over it in the midst of a very sometimes chaotic world, a world that doesn't always want to follow Him. And but we're called to live in that world, but not be part of that aspect of the world. So, this is integrated just like the body, soul, spirit. We're integrated. There is a physical nature and a spiritual nature to us as humans in the world. There is a spiritual dimension and a physical dimension. I've often thought, that I've heard people say, well, there's secular aspects of our life and there's spiritual aspects. And the more I've thought about it, the more I come to the conclusion that that's not exactly right. And I remember a young man telling me one time, he says, "Yeah, well, eating isn't a part of our Christian life. It isn't a spiritual aspect of our life." Well, 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all for the glory of God. Well, I would argue, and I put here, I was in a class setting, I asked, give me something that is just something that's not part of God's concern in your life. And really, God's concerned about everything in your life, whether it's the good things or the bad things. If it's the bad things, He wants, you to do better at getting away from those. It's a good thing. But I mean, does he care about how you eat? Well, yeah, he doesn't want us to, eat wrong and be gluttons is one of the sins. How we do sports, you know, do we do it with good sports or bad sports? Do we represent Christ by how we act in sports? Entertainment. I mean, for me, it's a dichotomy to say we have the secular parts of our life and a spiritual aspects of our life over here. In reality, every aspect of our life is under God's oversight as Christians. And our Christian worldview is saying, I have given my life over to Christ for transformation. And we're always being transformed. We never get to the point of perfection, but the biblical perspective is that we're constantly being transformed by our relationship and living in Christ. And so I would argue that there is no secular items that simply are of no concern to God. He is concerned about all aspects of our life. And but that's just something to think about on that. So we've used this in the past, as we looked at historical development previous to this crossroads here, modern period, and as we moved from the Renaissance to Enlightenment, and then into modernization. And we have seen that secular humanism philosophy arise, and we trace some of the history of that, and it's how it's influencing the knowledge sector. Evolutionary theory and materialism, the idea that only the physical exists, and how it's impacting science and reason. And we looked at the early science that it was, science was actually the science methodology was invented by Christians who were scientists. And but this one boils down to just reason and the five senses. Then modernization with the growth of wealth, you get your wealth accumulation and all the businesses and things associated with that are also impacting the world we live in. And then popular media, which is a purveyor of all these areas and helps to mold our perspective of them, which is often not a Christian perspective. But in the midst of all this, we have the Christian perspective or the Christian worldview or biblical worldview, which is to make a difference in those areas. And there is a choice. We as biblical worldview calls us to be transformed, and that we bring this. People can come into relationship with God and also be transformed. And this we call in the world, but we're not of the world down here. But and we live by faith and hope, love and service. And by that perspective, we hope to make inroads into these sectors and make a difference in them. God calls us, whatever profession we're in, to live for Him and make a difference in any of these aspects of the world we live in. However, we can make the choice that we're going to center ourselves, pull the world down to just this physical world, and rely on reason and science. Hasn't worked out well for those countries that have really bought into this. You look at communist China and Russia and how they killed millions of people with the idea of atheism as a center aspect of their political theory. But we don't, as Christians, we're going to be in this world, but we're not going to participate in this aspect of being a part of the world in that regard. And this kind of direction will, of course, minimize the Christian perspective in that regard. But hopefully, as Christians, we'll work towards this transforming direction instead of the conforming direction. So if we zoom in on this Christian perspective here, you have passages in the world, but not of the world. John 17, he says to his disciples in his prayer, he says, you know, they're not of this world, but I'm sending them into it. And you are the light of the world, Matthew 5:14. Jesus says that we should be the light of the world. And then go into all the world and make disciples, Matthew 28:19. And then Paul's admonition, live in peace with all people, so much as it depends on you, Romans 12:18. So this is all to say for us as Christians that we are, engaging the world we live in. And a major part of that is secular humanism in the United States. Of all the religions and worldviews in the U.S., the largest, of course, is Christianity. Uh, Currently, around 76% would advocate this in some form. But if you look at all the other religions and worldviews, they are a very small percentage of the population. In actuality, the largest other percentage is secular humanist perspective. Now, that's a broad area because you can have atheist secular humanists, but you have agnostic atheist secular humanists. But then you have people that just haven't thought about their worldview, and they're just bought into life and living it from a secular perspective, but they don't ideologically adhere to it necessarily. But if you ask them, well, are you religious? They say no, and so religion has not been no longer a part of their lives so much. Even though they may have overhangs, I call them, that things that came from religion that's still part of their lives. So this is the idea is for the Christian perspective, we're to take the Christian worldview, teachings, actions, attitudes into whatever profession we're in to serve and to make a difference as Christ would have us make that difference. Well, the final slide here to encourage us as we seek of how to engage secular humanism in the world we live in. That knowledge sector engagement, educational pursuits in both intellectual and spiritual aspects. And, university systems was started by Christians. And Christians have always been a part and highly valued education. But so much education now just ignores the whole spiritual dimension. And you find the Christian universities where where you have both of these perspectives, physical and spiritual, being talked about. But we need to do some educating from a Christian worldview and finding ways to apply it in this secular context that we're living. And we need to be able to enter into the intellectual dialogues with secularists. And we see there's a number of people, as we saw in the previous lecture, that are dialoguing at this level with those who outright are secular humanists. And we need to continue to work within the knowledge sector and make a difference. Science and reason engagement, it's in this day and age, it's more like it's just saying, well, to really be scientist and to be objective, you can't have a spiritual thinking. You can't believe in the spiritual realm, and that of course historically hasn't been true. And there are a lot of scientists doing good work out there that have a biblical worldview. Just because you have that belief doesn't negate your ability to observe the world we do live in using scientific method. And this is not science when you say you have to leave that spiritual worldview out. That's scientism. that we've talked about. Wealth accumulation, engagement. There is an opportunity, particularly in our country, that you have people that can accumulate wealth, and quite a considerable amount of wealth at times. But we don't do it. We as Christians shouldn't look at life as that's our ultimate purpose, is to accumulate wealth. Well, it may happen. I know some very wealthy Christians. Uh, Most of them use that in good ways, and use it as a blessing to a lot of other people. Other one or two, and no, I would not so sure they do that. But uh, if that's a blessing God's given a person, they should use it for His glory. And then popular media engagement. Our world is full of media now, and you can't get away from it. Everyone has it in their pocket with their phone or wherever, and we're just surrounded by media and news and what's going on, who's doing what, and people who want you to follow them, and all of those things. Um, and Yeah, it's a challenge to our world, and challenge to some of the things that it brings into people's lives is not necessarily good. But you can have good media, and Christianity has always been involved from the time of radio on, and trying to be involved in media that helps provide the Christian or biblical worldview into the thinking of people, and give them uh, good and uplifting media as well. So we need people who are engaged in that as well. Well, this it was just the final lecture on engaging secular humanism, and it also completes this series of lectures. For those of you who are taking this course, World Religions, this is also the final lecture of that course. And I want to thank you for being a part of the course. And of course, we will continue interacting on getting your assignments and everything done, but as we complete the semester. Uh, and so I thank you for being a part of it, and we'll call it the end of the lecture series. Take care. Have a good day.